What if I told you a giant slingshot made of rubber bands could hurl an actual car down the road? The only question is, how many rubber bands would it take before physics finally lets it fly? Today, we're answering one of the most ridiculous but fascinating questions ever. Can you launch a car using nothing but rubber bands? We'll break down the math of elastic energy, compare it to the mass of a car, and see whether it's even remotely possible. Spoiler, it's going to take a lot more than what you've got in your junk drawer. How strong is a rubber band? Let's start small. A standard office rubber band can stretch and store about 5 joules of energy. That's enough to launch a paperclip across the room, but not much else. For reference, 1 joule is the energy it takes to lift an apple about 10 centimeters. So one rubber band is basically the apple lifter of physics. Fire a pencil with a rubber band equals a few joules. Fire a car with rubber bands? Thousands upon thousands of times more. How much energy does a car need to move? Now, let's look at the car. A small car, like a Honda Civic, weighs around 1,200 kilograms. To launch it to even just highway speed, say 27 meters per second, about 60 miles per hour, you need kinetic energy. The formula is 1/2 mv squared. Do the math, and you get about 437,000 joules. That's nearly 500,000 joules just to get moving. Comparison. 1 rubber band equals 5 joules. Car at 60 miles per hour equals 437,000 joules. That means you'd need about 87,000 rubber bands just to get the car rolling down the highway once. But wait, rubber bands aren't perfect. Here's the catch. Rubber bands aren't efficient. They lose energy as heat and friction. Realistically, you'd need at least double that number to overcome losses. So now we're talking closer to 200,000 rubber bands to sling a car to highway speed. Imagine trying to tie 200,000 bands together without snapping your fingers off. That's not a slingshot. That's a nightmare craft project. Scaling up the slingshot. So how big would this slingshot have to be? Each rubber band only stretches a few times its length. To hold 200,000 of them, you'd need a slingshot frame taller than a skyscraper, anchored into the ground like the Hoover Dam. The tension alone would be enough to tear apart steel beams if one band snapped out of sync. Basically, you'd have built a medieval siege weapon for cars. Could monster rubber bands work? But let's not give up yet. What if we used giant industrial rubber bands? Think truck-size bungee cords, carnival slingshot rides, or even purpose-built elastic materials. Some heavy-duty elastics can store thousands of joules each. Replace your office bands with those, and suddenly the numbers shrink. Instead of 200,000 little bands, maybe you only need a few hundred monster bands. The problem? The recoil forces would be so violent, you'd turn the car, and probably the driver, into rubber band spaghetti. Here's the real challenge. It's not just about energy. It's about force. Cars aren't designed to be yanked like rubber ducks. Too much force too quickly, and the axles snap, the frame bends, and the whole thing crumples before it even moves. So could you apply the rubber band power gradually enough to launch the car without instantly destroying it? Engineers could try staging it. Instead of one big pull, imagine a series of progressively stronger rubber band launches, kind of like how rockets use multiple stages. Each sling pushes the car a little faster until it finally reaches highway speed. But by that point, you've basically reinvented a roller coaster launch system, which uses magnets, not rubber. Another idea. Instead of launching the car itself, attach the rubber bands to a giant catapult arm. But then you're not really launching a car anymore. You're flinging a very unlucky piece of scrap metal. So what's the verdict? To launch a car with rubber bands, you'd need hundreds of thousands of bands, or a few hundred monster elastics, perfectly aligned, tensioned, and reinforced by an enormous steel frame. Theoretically, yes, it's possible. Practically? The car would crumple, the rubber bands would snap, and you'd probably invent a brand new kind of disaster video. But the math does check out. With enough bands, you could send a car flying like a giant Hot Wheels toy. So how many rubber bands would it take to launch a car? Around 200,000 ordinary ones, or a few hundred industrial strength ones. The energy is there, but the practicality is not. Rubber bands are great for flying paper planes or snapping your coworkers, but not so great for highway-speed automotive launches. Still, it's fun to imagine a world where the biggest threat to traffic isn't gas prices, but a giant slingshot parked outside.